I welcome all of you to the Institute. We're delighted to have Rabbi Sam Karf, who will be speaking, of course, in just a moment, on the healing power of story. Rabbi Karf, as we all know, I think everybody here knows, was the senior rabbi at Congregation Beth Israel for 20-some-odd years, 27 years, I believe, 24 years. And was also Associate Director of the John McGovern Center for Health, Humanities, and the Human Spirit. He was Professor in the Department of Family Medicine at the University of Texas School of Medicine here in Houston, lecturer at Rice University. Rabbi Karf received his A.B. degree, magna cum laude, from Harvard College, and then earned his doctorate at the Hebrew Union College, the seminary which ordained him. He's written many books. A couple of them that I want to mention is he's author of Agadah, The Language of Jewish Faith, The Soul of the Rav, which was released in 1999. And most recently, his book is Permission to Believe, Finding Faith in Troubled Times, which was released by Abingdon Press out of the Methodist Church. So he's kind of crossing some boundaries there, as we all know. Of course, he does so beautifully. He's written chapters in 14 books and has done so much in this community that he's beloved by all of us in Houston that have ever heard him. That's why we have you gathered here today, because you surely have heard him speak before and love Rabbi Sam Karf. Would you please give a warm welcome to our speaker today?
Thank you, John. May I, before formally being timed as to how long my talk is, this doesn't count for the time, but it's something I want to say. I'd like to thank, in your behalf and in behalf of many who are not here, the leadership that John Graham has given this institute during a very critical time in its history. He's really put this institute on the Texas Medical Center map, and it is his work, and he is to be very, very much thanked for it. I want to talk to you today about a subject that's very close to my heart. We human creatures are both meaning seekers and storytellers, and the two are related. We use stories to affirm and express our sense of the meaning of our lives, and we often rely on stories to help us recover meaning in our life which has been threatened. Meaning is the sense that I have something to live for, that there's a purpose in my life, even when I faced the darkest phase of life, the darker side of life, radical economic reversal, which more than a few people have experienced in recent years in this country, the loss of a loved one that we've been bonded to for years, and serious, chronic, or life-threatening illness, just to name a few. The sources of meaning are multiple. I would mention, oh, by the way, the human spirit drives the quest for meaning, and meaning sustains the will to live. In human beings, the will to live is not fully instinctive. It can be lost. On the other hand, if we have something to live for, my mother of blessed memory had the last stage of ovarian cancer, and she insisted on a projection of how long she had to live from her doctor, and he gave it to her. But my youngest daughter was being married about 4 weeks after that projection. My mother was very sick, but she made it to the wedding, and she died shortly thereafter. Those stories are not that unusual. The sources of meaning, I would rate number one, love. The power to love and the experience of being loved. A loveless existence is intrinsically a meaningless existence. I would emphasize work. Work that gives us a sense of being useful and needed. And I would include intimations of earthly immortality. We are not only mortal creatures, we know that we are mortal creatures. We live in the consciousness of our dying. And so for the meaning of our life, especially when we reach the age that I have reached and know that very much the most of our life is behind us, that meaning depends on some intimation that we've so lived that we're leaving traces behind, that we will remain somewhat connected to this place even when we're no longer physically here, because of the persons we may have brought into this world and parented, because of the influence we've had for good, and the ripple effect of that influence, sometimes from generation to generation, from the works that we have created, from the healing that we've done, from the causes that we've served that are going to outlive us and that we've helped sustain during our part of the life journey. And fourth, but certainly not least, I would include, of course, religious faith. Living within a faith community with its sacred texts, its narratives, its stories, its beliefs, and its spiritual disciplines, and its supportive community. All these are, I think, for many of us, an ultimate source of meaning. And religious faith adds an additional dimension to the other sources of meaning which I have mentioned. Love. In a religious perspective, God loves us unconditionally. And that is the source of our power to love. And the commandment to love others and ourselves. We shouldn't forget that. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. That too is rooted in the divine will according to the religious perspective on life. I have my own spiritual discipline each morning. I draw my own edited version of the traditional liturgy. And I have evolved over the years words that came spontaneously and now, as long as the mind holds, come to mind when I pause for my spiritual discipline. And over the years, I've come to include these words. I am of worth not only because of what I do, but who I am. Because I am created in the divine image, because of God's unconditional love, I am of worth even when I screw up. And work also assumes a different dimension under the perspective of religious faith. Our life becomes a sacred vocation. We are called into this world to use our gifts, our God-given gifts, to help repair the brokenness in that tiny corner of God's world entrusted to our care. In my own tradition, the rabbis use the term Shutaf Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We are privilege to be partners, junior partners to be sure, but partners with God in the work of completing the work of creation. And of course, immortality may assume an additional dimension as well. The claim of religious faith, of many of our religious faiths, is not only that by our life we have the capacity to be remain connected to the world we leave behind, but that God, not the angel of death, speaks the last word, and that our death is, whatever the mystery turns out to be, is a return to the soul of the universe, to abide in God's eternity. Physical disability may trigger a crisis of meaning. Tamara Green was a professor at Hunter College for many years. She was born handicapped. She was dependent throughout her life, as far as I know, on crutches for her mobility. And periodically she had problems breathing, which catapulted her into the hospital for some treatment. And after a while, any chronic condition becomes old. It can precipitate at least a mild crisis of meaning. Why? Tamara Green identified herself as a Jew, and her favorite way of identifying and being nourished by her faith was to attend a regular Sabbath morning Torah study led by a rabbi. And occasionally she had a kind of a mordant wit. She would bitterly ask, if we are created in the divine image, is God a cripple? And one week in the study group, they were reading the text of Moses ascending Mount Sinai to receive the tablets. And he received them, and he saw the children of Israel worshiping a golden calf. And he was so furious that he shattered the commandments. I've got to be careful about fruitful asides because I'm on a time frame, but I can't resist this one. Freud was fascinated by Michelangelo's Moses. And whenever he was in Rome, he would stand. But he interpreted it in his own way. According to Freud's interpretation, Moses didn't drop the tablets. He was tempted to, but his ego prevailed. I think it's more compelling to take the original. He dropped the tablets in his fury. But then, a few chapters later, God takes another chance on this people and commands Moses to go up the mountain again and get another set of tablets. He does, and this time there's no golden calf. These tablets are placed in the portable ark which accompanied the children of Israel in their wanderings in the wilderness. And when the generation that came to the Holy Land came there and built the temple, the tablets were placed in the Holy of Holies in the temple. Tamara Green is listening to all this, and she makes so bold as to ask the rabbi, so what happened to the broken tablets? And the rabbi looked at her and he said, well, one of our sages told the story that God commanded Moses to find and take those shattered tablets and place them in the ark with those that were not broken. That story was healing to Tamara Green. In another vein, I taught for 12 years future physicians. And in the third year, they actually visit patients, treat patients in the clinic. But this third-year student was going on rounds with a resident. And they came into the room of a patient, and the resident said, "Mrs. Matthew, you have an abscess. And I must tell you, it needs treatment because it could be dangerous to your health." And her response was, "Leave me alone. I don't care. I don't want you to do anything. Leave me alone." Taken aback, the resident repeated, I'm telling you, Mrs. Matthew, that this could be life-threatening if it's not treated." "I know, I don't care. Just leave me alone." "Well, if you change your mind, let us know." And the resident walked out. The third-year student physician followed. Well, the third-year student physician has more time than the resident. And he also felt somehow obsessed with this, the way this was unresolved. So he went back to the room, and he asked permission to sit by Mrs. Matthew's bed. And he held her hand, and he said, "Tell me, Mrs. Matthew, why won't you let us treat you?" Now let me interject that there are different ways of asking a question. We can ask a question in a way that we really don't want an answer. You know, you're walking in the street and you say, "How are you?" "Fine," and that's it. Suppose we said, "How are you?" and the person grabbed us by the lapel and said, "Not well at all, and I want to tell you about it." We'd be terribly disappointed. Well, obviously, this student physician asked the question in a way that radiated a sense of caring. "I really want you to tell me your story." And she did. As she sobbed, she blurted out, "I've been HIV positive for 10 years. I don't deserve to be treated." And without missing a beat, the student physician responded, "Mrs. Matthew, you deserve to be treated as much as I do, and you owe it to yourself and your family to be treated. Please let us treat you." And she did. You see, the third-year student did not accept her narrative, and he lovingly gave her a healing narrative, and she embraced it. Some of my most meaningful conversations have been with persons who knew they were dying, and I knew they were dying. And they knew that I knew, and I knew that they knew. And those are some of the most authentic conversations that I have ever had. No pretensions, no primping, no small talk, full disclosure. What has troubled me in my pastoral work over the years, and in my work at the medical center, is just how often that precious time between a person knowing that he's dying or she is dying and that lapse into unconsciousness is not utilized. I have been with members of the family who are in the room and they're making small talk. They're not acknowledging that this is real. our capacity to be with each other is about to end in this world. And if it is utilized, what a capacity to bless and be blessed by the words that each speaks to the other. To be able to say to a person who's dying, oh, it was such a privilege to be your son. Or to tell stories about what we've shared. There is no blessing more precious than that validation. And in reverse, I know a woman who knew she was dying after a valiant battle with cancer. She actually, while she still had any strength, she was confined to her bed. She invited her very close friends to come at appointed times so she could say goodbye. And there was no small talk. There was that communication both ways, where they blessed each other by the stories that they told to each other. That's healing of the spirit for the living and for the dying. Dr. Arthur Frank, very conscious that illness can threaten our sense of meaning, identified 3 kinds of illness narratives that are constructed by the patient in collaboration with a physician or pastor or friend. The first narrative he calls the restitution narrative. The restitution narrative is the best, it's the easiest. It's being able to say and to know that it is so from a credible source, the doctor. You've got a long recovery. You've got a lot of work, but you can be restored fully. That's certainly a motivation to go through some hell along the way if you hold that hope before you. If that is not possible, and you realize that you have experienced a life-transforming illness or accident, Dr. Franks says you may be catapulted into a chaos narrative. The chaos narrative, everything is all jumbled up and confused and meaningless. And there's anger and all kinds of unconstructive conversation. The tendency of those who attend a person who is in the midst of a chaos narrative is to contradict it and to make it nice, you know. It's okay, it's not that way. Doesn't work that way. Such a person needs to grieve the losses in order to find possible healing on the other side. What that person needs from the pastor, the rabbi, the doctor, is for them to validate the chaos narrative. I'm not there, but I can imagine what it must be. It's tough. I feel for you and with you. It's to bear witness to it. And it's to be present with the ill person through it. And if one is fortunate either as a patient or as the caregiver or the pastor, sometimes after months of this kind of presence and witnessing, the person is ready for a different narrative. And this is called the quest narrative. You are ready to search for the building blocks of a new life, and even hoping to use this trauma in rebuilding your life. Now, I have been blessed to go through those three narratives with a student of mine at our congregation. His name is Jeremy Tucker. He was a wonderful young man in religious school. He not only had a sparkling intellect, but he had a compassionate heart. That combination is not always present. And he sustained it. Already before he graduated from high school, he decided he wanted to be a pediatrician. He loved children. And he wanted to specialize in caring for marginal children, for those in an underserved community. He went to Yale, and he graduated summa cum laude with a degree in English literature, and being told, you have the gift to write. He was accepted to Harvard Medical School, but he decided to delay that so he could go to Phoenix, to a barrio in Phoenix, and teach for America. He taught at-risk children for 2 years. Not only that, he developed a one-on-one relationship with Victor, a 14-year-old, who grew up in an atmosphere of gangs and violence and physical abuse. He gained permission to take Victor on a trek through the Grand Canyon. It was a tough, tough trip. And Jeremy kept a journal. But it turned out to be a life-transforming trip. Anyway, 2 years passed, and he went to Harvard Medical School, and of course he graduated with highest distinction. And Ralph Eigen of Texas Children's Hospital made a trip to Boston to woo him back for his internship and residency at Texas Children's. Harvard wanted him to stay there. He came back, and after his first year, he was suddenly assaulted by a malignant tumor. And when he woke up from surgery, he realized he wasn't able to communicate coherently or understandably to others. And he realized that he needed a wheelchair. At first, he struggled for a restitution narrative. Oh, I'm going to take physical therapy, and I'm going to take occupational therapy, and I'm going to do everything. And I'm going to be the best at it, and I'm going to work at it. I'm going to be a doctor. And soon enough, he realized that's not going to happen. And at that point, he was catapulted into a chaos narrative. He just wanted to die, and said so. And he said the only thing that was keeping him from taking his life was he didn't want to hurt his parents. I developed the urge to be with him through that journey. And every Sunday that I was in town, we had a date. And I would go over and spend an hour and a half with him. It wasn't easy. For months, no matter how I diverted him, and for a while he was diverted and we talked about something else, before I left, he made sure to tell me, it's over. My life is over. And I would say to him, you know, Jeremy, if you really are determined to do this, you can. There's some people who are going to be very sad if you do. And I'm one of them. I kind of wish, more than kind of wish, that you decide to hang around. Well, he smiled, but at first it was a pretty vacuous smile. It was not one of conviction. This went on for months. Every week, same conversation with some variation. And then, miracle of miracles, I sensed an opening. I sensed that he was ready for the quest narrative. I suggested to him that his mind was still intact. What a blessing. That quirky sense of humor was still intact, and it started showing in our conversation. He loved movies, and he started going to movies again with his aide and critiquing them and sending me email reviews. We didn't always agree in our evaluation of the movies, but I tended to go to them if he gave it a positive, and he was a very tough critic. And I encouraged him. He couldn't write, but he could type on the computer. I encouraged him to complete the journal and turn it into a book. And he worked at it religiously. He completed the book, and it was hard to get it published, but a publisher was found, and it's been published under the title Before a Canyon, Grand Canyon. And before he wrote the final chapter, he decided that he needed to revisit Victor. So with his aide, he was unable to travel by himself. He flew to Phoenix, reconnected with Victor, and from Phoenix, he sent me this email. I've got the text. My journey was great. I think the change in a person from child to teen to adult is a miracle. The ways we change, the ways we don't. It's a miracle of life's journey. Witnessing life is a blessing. You can imagine that I was reduced, not reduced is the wrong word, I just cried like a baby when I received that email. Because I knew that Jeremy would have his crises, but that he had chosen life. Life's tragic dimension is the presence of undeserved suffering. And for persons of faith, it can be a real challenge. Our traditions offer responses. And often they are in the form of stories. Linda and Jack Bruto were members of my congregation. Their son Nicholas was 7½. Jack was doing some repairs on his car, and Nicholas was helping. And he sent Nicholas to the garage to fetch a tool. And a loose plank fell on Nicholas, and so hard and so heavily, and cast him to the ground. And Nicholas never regained consciousness. I'll never forget 3 a.m. at a local hospital when the respirator was removed And Jack held Nicholas in his arms and said goodbye to him audibly as he was sobbing uncontrollably. If you're in that room, you feel terribly helpless. But that moment was strangely, both terribly sad and strangely beautiful. In the weeks ahead, of course, the community rallied around and nourished, and lots of food and giving opportunities to talk about Nicholas. And then people go on to their lives, and you're really left alone to handle it. And Jack and Linda called me and wanted to come in and see me. If they had raised this question weeks earlier, I would have not answered it. I might have said just, I don't know, and given them a big hug and shown them as much love as I could. But now it was time to draw on the stories. Jack was a faithful member of our congregation. He believed. How could a good God allow this? It's just so senseless, he said. Why? And that was the time to tell him that our traditions wrestled with this, because that dimension of life is omnipresent. Sometimes we are called upon to affirm our trust in God because of what we experience, and sometimes in spite of what we experience. And I told him some stories that have been helpful to some. I told him the story of Job. And for me, the story of Job, essential point is Job experiences these terrible, terrible sufferings. And his friends, so-called, in quotation marks, come to comfort him. And they say, you must have done something terrible. I mean, God is just. You must have done something. And he refuses to acknowledge that. Even against God, if he will challenge God. He doesn't deserve this. He didn't do anything to deserve this. And God appears out of the whirlwind. Doesn't give him a reason. Asks him, where were you when I created the world? It all comes down to be human, Job, is to raise questions that are beyond your power to answer. Life is not just a puzzle to solve. It's a mystery to embrace. And you are called to struggle, to reaffirm that trust, which may be so difficult and yet more needed than ever, that within that mystery there is some meaning. A variation on that, still with a God who is in control, fully in control, is the story in the Talmud of Rabbi Meir and his wife Bruria. A lot of stories about them. Rabbi Meir was a Sabbath morning. Rabbi Meir was in the synagogue expounding the Torah. His wife was home. They had twin sons. And when she went into their room, she found they were lifeless. We would call it, I guess, infant death syndrome. And of course, she was heartbroken. And when she recovered a bit, she said, how can I tell Meir? And when Meir returned, Bruria told her husband, "Dear, I didn't tell you this before, but someone came to visit and left for my keeping 2 precious jewels. And I was told to take good care of them. And I did. But they came while you were gone and reclaimed them. What should I have done?" And he said, "Well, of course, if they were entrusted to you but not given to you forever, you return the pearls." And she led him to the room. And when he saw the meaning of her story, he burst into a chaos narrative. Just went berserk, if you can use those terms for a Talmudic story. And they hugged and they cried. And then Gloria said, "But you said you would need to return them." And Meir quoted the book of Job. "The Lord gave, the Lord reclaimed. Blessed be the name of the Lord." And I left that story with them. And then I said, "But there's a different kind of story, which our tradition also tells. And that story suggests that we are essentially limited. But God is self-limited. God chooses to be limited by God's purposes. God feels that human dignity requires freedom. God could spare us from a lot of wrong decisions, from a lot of wrong paths, if we were puppets on a string. And God controlled it, but we would never be fully human. And so God suffers the price of giving us that freedom. God weeps with us as we make our errors along the way. And also, God has given us a lawful world. Translating it into our terms, a world that is dependable in terms of its physical laws so that science can occur and doctors can study diseases and find cures. Part of the price of a world is God's stepping back and functioning within those structures, within that lawfulness that has been given to us. It's expressed in one way, a story in the Talmud. A farmer, a very pious farmer, honest as the day is long, and a farmer across the road, crooked as the day is long. And the crooked farmer crosses the road and steals some grains, wheat, from the good farmer. And by rights they shouldn't grow. But by golly, they grow just as much as the grain of the pious farmer. And the Talmud says, Ha'olam kamin hago noheg. The world follows its natural course. And they give other examples of this. Viruses are no respecters of character, and so on. But there is this climactic story in this vein. In the book of Deuteronomy, there's an interesting commandment. The Hebrews were not commanded to be vegetarians, but they were commanded to show some kindness and sensitivity even when they ate small birds that were in the nest. The Bible says in Deuteronomy, I think it's 22, but I'm not a good citer of biblical texts, I never was, that if you see a bird's nest, and there are birds there, and the mother bird is hovering over, you can fetch those birds for dinner. But shoo away the mother bird before you do, so she doesn't have to see them separated from her. And if you do, you will flourish, and your days will be long on this earth. That's the story. So then the sequel is, this pious Jew climbs a tree with a ladder, shoos away the mother bird, fetches the young. The ladder fall collapses, and this man who followed the Torah strictly is catapulted to his death. So, there's a big Talmudic discussion. How come? It's promised. And there are different answers given. The rabbis are sitting around and different answers given. And one of the more popular answers given by the rabbis is, it says you will be rewarded, but maybe not in this world. In the world to come, you will receive your reward. And there were other answers given. And then Rabbi Eliezer, I don't know if he raised his hand, but he opened his mouth. And he said, look, it happened because it was a rickety ladder. God doesn't do and control everything that happens in this world. So the Talmud says, don't go to a dangerous place and pray for a miracle. There are some who find it easier to reaffirm their trust in God who didn't cause this. It's part of the world, of God's self-limitation in order to the price that God and we pay for human freedom and for a lawful universe. Well, in our congregation, we have a custom on the holiest day of the year, on Yom Kippur, to invite 3 or 4 people from the congregation whose stories I know, all of whom have in some way faced the darker side of life and managed to reach the quest narrative. And I invited Jack Bruda to speak on how Judaism has shaped his life in time of trouble, trauma, and loss. I didn't know what he was going to say. He got up and he told the story of Rabbi Meir and Bruria. And he said, if I knew that Nicholas would only be with us for 7.5 years, I would still do it and cherish him. And I somehow need to believe, and I do believe, that Nicholas is in a good place, and we miss him terribly. So, Jack had found in this story a way to reaffirm the meaning of his life in a religious sense. Okay. I really should. It's 10 of 6. I've spoken for about 50 minutes, or close to 50 minutes. If we had the time, first of all, I would welcome any questions or comments that you have. Basically, let me, in terms of my informal, formal presentation, let me simply say that The American Association of Medical Colleges accredits medical schools. And an indication of how the prevailing medical model has changed from the biomedical model to the biopsychosocial spiritual model. This is one of the latest statements from the American Association of Medical Colleges, which accredits every medical school. Health is not just absence of disease. It's a state of well-being that includes a sense that life has purpose and meaning. In my 12 years teaching medical students, I would tell them that there's a difference between disease and illness. This is an original with me. Disease is a biomedical perspective on bodily malfunction. Illness is a disease that happens to you, not to someone else. Illness is how you are experiencing that disease, that condition, what impact it has on your life and on your spirit. And I encourage doctors that it's not enough to address the disease. It's important to connect to the patient as person and to understand how that condition is being received by that patient. There's a terrible problem of non-compliance. I was talking to Dr. Kaufman. That the degree of non-compliance is somewhere between 20 and 50% in our biomedical age. It's not enough to have the armor. You've got to use it. I submit that the level of compliance increases when the patient feels listened to. The story is listened to. When the patient feels that the doctor cares, that the doctor is an advocate and a partner, not just a detached dispenser of medical knowledge and skill for compensation. And the stories that people tell us and listening to the stories that others tell is itself part of the healing. With that, I surrender the podium. It's a pleasure talking with you.
Any questions?
I trained residents, and I had one from Taiwan. She mentioned you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Listen more than you talk. And you know how studies show that when a doctor interviews a patient, a new patient, his first question comes out after 18 seconds on an average, which can totally divert your understanding of the story that the patient wants you to hear. So you have to listen.
That study shows that they interrupt the doctor usually interrupts after 18 seconds, and the story, the average story, is not longer than 2.5 minutes. Thank you.
One more thing. What about, you have any words concerning, say, a patient with Alzheimer's, a family that's dealing with someone that really is a different person? They're in a different state, and meaning and purpose are meaningless. Do you have any words to say about that?
Well, I think that's a situation that any of us can face personally, and then it's a challenge for our caregivers, or can face with members of our family or friends, and then it's a challenge for us. Of course, the greatest challenge is for the spouse. I've been involved with families who unfortunately have experienced this. I think that, well, the time comes when the spouse recognizes that I'm living alone. As long as there is not great belligerence and great hostility, it's important for the spouse to allow himself or herself time to be away with friends, to be sure that you have the best caretaker, but to give yourself time to interact with other persons, or to invite those persons in the house who are dear friends and who understand the situation. And if there comes a time when it's not just a matter of not having someone to talk to, but it's a matter of violence and belligerence and fear, then that terribly difficult decision, but it may be right to make it, to place that loved one in a home that is equipped to take care of, and also to provide some ways of ministering. Music, for example, certain kinds of music persons who are facing dementia can respond to, things like that. I think the key is, and this is where a pastor has a double role. You know, Raimund Niebuhr, a Christian minister from whom I learned a great deal, said that the purpose of religion is to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted.
Yeah.
And there are times when we need to afflict the comfortable, the prophetic role. Be the decent person that you're capable of being. Don't keep up with this affair and stay married to your wife and want to have the best of both worlds without paying any price. And there are times such as dementia where the spouse needs permission. And I think the role of the pastor is to sensitively grant it.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else?
The issue of abortion is a pretty sensitive subject in our world, and there are roughly 7 times more embryos killed than all of the Holocaust, and that's 7 times every year. When you have someone who's debating that, how do you comfort or afflict? How do you deal with that?
Well, that's a very difficult one, Bob, because, you know, Jewish tradition does not favor abortion, you know, as a convenient measure and permits it as a convenient measure. But even biblical Judaism does not regard abortion as the equivalent of murder. The Bible describes a situation where 2 men are fighting with each other, and a pregnant woman comes by and, you know, and they hit the woman. If she loses the life she is carrying, it's monetary compensation. If the mother is killed, it's capital punishment. Abortion is permitted when it is necessary, when you must choose between the life of the mother and the life of the fetus. And liberal Jews would enlarge that to be the life and health of the mother. I'll give you an example. couple came to see me. It was an unplanned pregnancy. And they weren't ready to have another child. And I would not have given them, on the basis of what was said so far, I would not have given them, quote, permission. But then they went on to tell me that they had amniocentesis and that they discovered there's so many disorders that the prognosis was that this life would come into the world with terrible suffering, very little time to live, no interaction, and so forth. I mean, there was a whole series of... And I was quiet, and they said, but you know, I think we're going to go through with it. After all, who knows when we want to have a baby, whether we will, and how we'll feel about it. And maybe the predictions are not going to take place. It's maybe not 100%. Maybe we have a chance that it will not. We're going to go through with it. And I said, good. The next morning, the husband called me and said, my wife was up all night, trembling, just absolutely uncontrollably. I mean, I thought she was going to have a nervous breakdown. And she said, I can't go through with it. I can't go through with it. And I gave her permission to have an abortion. And my tradition, as I interpret that tradition, so the problem that you have is that my understanding is that even in the Catholic tradition, in fact, I asked the assistant to the head of the Archdiocese some years ago, a wonderful young priest who loved to run. He explained to me that the law of double effect, that if you're focusing on saving the life of the mother rather then it can be justified. But in my tradition, there is more leeway in terms of the life and health of the mother. The fetus does not, it is a value, and it is to be cherished, and there are certain things you can do to save a fetus that you can't do normally, working on the Sabbath or whatever. But the fetus does not attain the same value as the mother if a tragic choice has to be made until the fetus emerges from the womb. Now, the Catholic position is different, but I, in good faith, follow a tradition that is different. And in the United States, I think there is more to be gained by allowing persons who in good faith arrive at a different position from ours to wrestle with their conscience and with their pastor than to enforce a position that is mine on the basis of political influence or political power. I think the price of living in a society, period, is to support certain things that you personally, that the government does, that you personally are anathema to you, including for some of us war. But it is the price of getting the benefits and of living in this society. So I would say that I can't advise you because we're not, I respect you, I love you, and
I didn't ask this as a trick question. I was
no, I didn't receive it as a trick question. It's a very earnest question, and it's a very agonizing question. And I've talked about it with my friend Archbishop Fiorenza, and it's one thing that we disagree upon. We agree about so much.
I appreciate your honesty, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.